Every year, Americans spend more than $600 per household on lawn and garden supplies. The container gardening market alone hit $3.5 billion in 2023 and keeps climbing. 80% of American households now do some kind of gardening. Container gardening specifically is popular with more than half of all urban households, and yet most of them replant the same pots every single spring. Petunias, marigolds, impatiens, buy them in April. Watch them die in October, throw the soil away, start over. Year after year, the same cycle. That was 2023. By 2025, the containers and planters segment of the urban gardening market was pulling in $6.2 billion in revenue. People are buying more pots than ever. The edible landscaping trend had already caught on with 45% of homeowners. Clearly, there is no shortage of interest in growing food at home. But almost nobody is putting perennials in those pots. That was the trend 5 years ago. That is the trend now. Billions flowing into containers, and the vast majority of those containers get emptied and refilled every single season, like a subscription you keep renewing for no good reason. How does someone go from a world where your grandmother kept the same rosemary bush alive on a kitchen windowsill for 15 years to a world where we treat every potted plant like it has an expiration date? These 12 plants survive winters, come back on their own, and some of them produce food you can eat for a decade or more out of the same container. Your great-grandparents knew all of them. Somewhere between then and now, we forgot. And the one at the end of this list can feed you every spring for 20 years from a single pot. Number 1. Chives. There is a good chance you have bought a plastic clamshell of dried chives from a grocery store shelf at some point. Paid $3 or $4 for a container the size of your thumb. The Romans would have laughed at you for that, and I mean that respectfully. Chives are one of the oldest cultivated alliums on the planet. Written records of herb cultivation go back to 2700 BC, and chives were in the mix from the beginning. The ancient Romans used them not just for cooking but as a remedy for sore throats and sunburns. They grew them in pots and in garden beds, and the plants came back year after year without replanting. That is the part that gets lost in the modern grocery store aisle. Chives are a perennial. You plant them once in an 8-inch deep container with decent drainage, set them somewhere with a few hours of sunlight, and they come back every single spring. They are a cut-and-come-again plant, which means every time you snip the leaves, they regrow. One pot of chives can replace every plastic clamshell you would otherwise buy for years. And here is a detail most people miss entirely. Chive flowers are edible. Those little purple pom-poms that pop up in late spring taste like a mild, sweet onion and look beautiful scattered over a salad or a baked potato. Most gardeners cut them off and throw them in the compost. That is free food going straight into the trash. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense to a lot of people. Number 2. Mint. Mint has a reputation problem. Experienced gardeners will tell you never to plant mint in a garden bed because it spreads like it is trying to conquer your entire yard. And they are right. Mint sends out underground runners called stolons that can take over raised beds, flower borders, and even cracks in pavement if you give it half a chance. But that exact quality is why mint is one of the best perennials to grow in a pot. The container does the work of controlling it. Mint in a 12-inch pot stays in that pot, comes back every year, and gives you fresh leaves from spring through fall. You do not need to do anything complicated. Water it, cut it, use it. What most people do not realize is that there are hundreds of mint varieties beyond the basic spearmint and peppermint you find at the store. Chocolate mint, apple mint, pineapple mint, orange mint. Each one has a genuinely different flavor profile, and each one grows the same way in a container. You could line a balcony railing with 5 or 6 different mints in small pots and have a tea garden that lasts for years without replanting a single thing. Mint is one of the oldest cultivated herbs in recorded history. Ancient Romans grew it at military forts alongside rosemary, thyme, and lavender. Archaeologists have found evidence of mint cultivation at Roman garrisons across Britain, where soldiers planted herb gardens that included mint for cooking, for medicine, and simply to make the barracks smell better. It was flavoring, pharmacy, and air freshener all in one plant. The irony is that mint might actually be the single easiest perennial to keep alive in a container. It is genuinely difficult to kill. Overwater it, and it bounces back. Forget about it for a week, and it bounces back. Cut it all the way down to the soil line, and it grows right back from the roots. The only way to reliably kill mint is to stop watering it entirely for a month during the hottest part of summer. And even then, some varieties will surprise you. And the only thing that has changed about mint since the Romans is that we stopped growing it at home and started buying it in plastic bags instead. The same pattern keeps showing up with the next one. Number 3. Rosemary. Ancient cultures connected rosemary with memory. Greek students wore garlands of rosemary during exams because they believed it sharpened recall. Romans burned rosemary at funerals and weddings as a symbol of remembrance. The association was so strong that the herb's Latin name, rosmarinus, translates loosely to dew of the sea, a reference to the Mediterranean coastline where it grew wild along the cliffs. Rosemary is a woody perennial that can live for years, sometimes well over a decade, in a single container. It is native to the dry, rocky Mediterranean coast, which means it actually prefers the kind of conditions a pot naturally creates. Fast-draining soil, not too much water, plenty of sun. A terracotta pot on a south-facing patio is closer to its natural habitat than most garden beds. The plant gets bushier and more productive every year. A 3-year-old rosemary bush in a 14-inch pot can produce more fresh rosemary than a family of 4 could ever use in a season. You can dry it, freeze it, or just keep snipping sprigs whenever you need them. And it costs about the same as 2 packages of fresh rosemary from the produce section. Except one of those packages lasts a week. The pot lasts a decade. There is one more thing about rosemary that most modern gardeners do not know. Ancient cultures placed it under pillows because they believed it improved dreams. They burned dried sprigs as incense during religious ceremonies. They wove it into wedding bouquets as a promise that the couple would remember their vows. The plant carried that weight of meaning for thousands of years, and now most people encounter it for the first time as a garnish on a restaurant steak. That gap between what rosemary used to mean and what it means now tells you something about how disconnected we have gotten from the plants that were once woven into everyday life. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover forgotten food history and backyard growing secrets every week. By 2024, the global gardening market had reached $120 billion. More than half of Generation Z and Generation Y gardeners said they expected to spend more time gardening in the coming year. The interest was there. The willingness was there. People were just not doing it with the plants that would actually stick around. Number 4. Thyme. The Romans did not just cook with thyme. They scattered it across the floors of their homes because they believed it purified the air. Roman soldiers bathed in thyme-infused water before going into battle. The name itself comes from the Greek word thymon, which some scholars connect to the word for courage. There are over 400 species of thyme worldwide, and the creeping varieties are almost tailor-made for container growing. They spill over the edges of shallow pots, fill in gaps, and create a dense mat of tiny aromatic leaves that you can pinch off anytime you want. A single thyme plant in a wide, shallow pot can produce enough fresh thyme for a kitchen for an entire growing season. Thyme was also one of the earliest antiseptic herbs. Before modern disinfectants existed, thyme oil was used to treat wounds and prevent infection. During the Middle Ages, European women embroidered sprigs of thyme onto scarves and gave them to soldiers going off to battle as a symbol of bravery. The compound responsible for its antiseptic properties, thymol, is still used today in products like Listerine mouthwash. So your grandmother's windowsill thyme plant was doing double duty as a pharmacy and a spice rack, and nobody gave it credit. The practical advantage of thyme in a container is that it is incredibly low maintenance. Once established, creeping thyme varieties need almost nothing from you. They tolerate drought, they tolerate poor soil, and they stay evergreen in many climates, meaning you have fresh herbs available even in winter, in milder regions. A pot of creeping thyme on a sunny patio is one of the most reliable perennial herbs you can own. Someone saw it coming, by the way. Garden historians have been pointing out for years that the shift away from perennial herbs toward disposable annuals coincided almost exactly with the rise of the modern supermarket herb aisle. Nobody listened. Number 5. Sage. The ancient Romans called sage herba sacra, the sacred herb. They harvested it with elaborate rituals, using special knives and wearing specific clothing because they considered it that important. Sage was a prized medicinal herb in Rome, used to treat everything from digestive issues to sore throats to memory loss. The practical side of sage is just as impressive. It is a perennial shrub that does extremely well in containers because it prefers the well-drained, slightly dry conditions that pots naturally provide. Sage is drought-tolerant, which means it is one of the most forgiving plants you can grow if you tend to forget about watering. The stems become woody over time, and the plant develops into a small bush with soft, silvery green leaves that look good even when you are not harvesting them. A sage plant in a 10-inch pot, sitting somewhere with full sun, will produce more sage than you can reasonably use in a year. Dry the extra. Sage dries beautifully and keeps its flavor for months. Your ancestors did this routinely. The only reason it feels novel now is that we decided it was easier to buy a tiny jar of dried sage for $5 than to grow a lifetime supply for the cost of a single seedling. Now, sage is hardy and tough, but this next one might be the single most indestructible herb you can put in a container. Number 6. Oregano. The Greeks called oregano, oros, which translates to joy of the mountain. It grew wild on the hillsides above the Mediterranean, and Greek and Roman cooks considered it essential. Brides and grooms wore crowns of oregano at weddings. It was planted on graves as a sign that the departed had found peace. In a pot, oregano is borderline unkillable. It prefers poor soil. It does not need much water. It actually produces more flavorful leaves when it is growing in conditions that would stress most other plants. The oils that give oregano its sharp, warm flavor concentrate when the plant is slightly underwatered and underfed, which means the lazier you are about maintaining it, the better it tastes. A single oregano plant in a container will spread to fill whatever space you give it and come back year after year. You can harvest it constantly throughout the growing season, and the plant responds by producing even more foliage. Dry it in bunches, and you have a year's supply of oregano from one pot that cost you a few dollars to set up. And somehow, people still buy those tiny spice jars at the supermarket every few months, spending more per ounce than they would on a houseplant that never dies. Think about that for a second. Number 7. Lavender. Most people think of lavender as a fragrance plant. Soap, candles, sachets for dresser drawers, and it does all of that. But lavender has a history as a food ingredient that almost nobody talks about anymore. Lavender flowers are edible. They have been used in French, Italian, and Middle Eastern cooking for centuries. Lavender shortbread, lavender lemonade, lavender honey, lavender-infused salt. The flavor is floral and slightly sweet with a hint of citrus, and a little goes a long way. The plant itself is a Mediterranean perennial, just like rosemary, which means it has the same love of well-drained soil and full sun. And that is exactly why it does so well in pots. Lavender in a garden bed with heavy clay soil often rots out within a season or two because the roots sit in too much moisture. Lavender in a terracotta pot with gritty potting mix can live for years because the pot gives it the drainage it actually needs. There is a practical bonus here too. Lavender is one of the best bee-attracting plants you can grow on a balcony or patio. If you are growing any vegetables or fruits nearby that need pollination, a pot of lavender nearby brings in the pollinators that do the work for you. If you are wondering why this list is mostly herbs so far, pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything. Number 8. Sorrel. Here is a plant that used to be a staple in European kitchens and has almost completely vanished from modern cooking. French sorrel, Rumex scutatus, is a perennial green with a bright, lemony flavor that tastes like someone crossed spinach with a squeeze of fresh lemon juice. For centuries, sorrel was a basic potherb across France, England, and Eastern Europe. It went into soups, sauces, salads, and stews. French cooks paired it with fish and cream. English cottage gardeners grew it alongside their cabbages and onions. It was cheap, it was nutritious, and it came back every single year without replanting. Sorrel is high in vitamin C and works as a cut-and-come-again green, which means you harvest the outer leaves, and the plant keeps producing new ones from the center. In a pot, sorrel stays manageable and productive for years. Remove the flower stalks when they appear, because flowering makes the leaves turn bitter, and the plant will just keep giving you fresh greens. You can grow sorrel in partial shade, which makes it perfect for a spot that does not get enough sun for most herbs. And the total cost of entry is a small pot, some soil, and a packet of seeds that runs about $3. That is decades of free salad greens from one afternoon of planting. And if that sounds good, this next one is going to seem ridiculous in the best way. Number 9. Lemon balm. Medieval European monks called lemon balm the elixir of life. That is a bold name for a plant you can grow in a coffee can on your fire escape, but they were not entirely wrong about its properties. Lemon balm has been used for centuries to calm anxiety, improve sleep, and settle upset stomachs. Modern research has actually backed up some of those claims, with studies showing mild sedative and anti-anxiety effects from lemon balm tea. The plant is a perennial member of the mint family, and it behaves like mint in almost every way. It spreads aggressively in garden beds, which means a container is the smartest place to grow it. It comes back every year. It tolerates partial shade, and it produces lemon-scented leaves that make one of the most refreshing herbal teas you can brew at home. A single lemon balm plant in a pot near your back door gives you fresh tea material from spring through fall, and dried leaves that last through winter. The whole setup costs less than a single box of commercial herbal tea. And unlike the teabag version, fresh lemon balm tea has a flavor that is bright, clean, and genuinely calming in a way the dried supermarket stuff cannot match. Lemon balm also attracts pollinators when it flowers, makes a decent companion plant for vegetables, and can be used in cooking, in cocktails, and as a garnish. A 16th century Swiss physician named Paracelsus reportedly claimed lemon balm could completely revitalize the body. He probably overstated it. But the plant did earn a permanent spot in monastery gardens across Europe for 500 years, which is more than most modern wellness products can say. If you are still wondering how these plants got forgotten, consider this. Most of them were everyday kitchen staples for centuries. They were not exotic or fancy. They were the equivalent of keeping salt and pepper in the cupboard. And that ordinariness might be exactly why they fell off the radar when supermarkets made everything available in a bag. Nobody writes a magazine article about salt. Nobody makes a trendy Instagram post about pepper. And for decades, nobody bothered to tell new gardeners that these perennial herbs existed because the people who already grew them thought it was obvious. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains the whole "why did everyone stop planting these" question better than anything else on this list. Number 10. Egyptian walking onions. These are genuinely one of the strangest and most useful perennials you can grow in a container. Egyptian walking onions, also called tree onions or top-setting onions, produce small bulbils at the top of their stalks instead of flowers. When the stalk gets heavy enough, it bends over and the bulbils touch the ground, where they take root and start new plants. That is how they walk across a garden, one generation literally tipping over to plant the next. They are a perennial allium, meaning you plant them once and harvest green tops, small bulbs, and those top-set bulbils for years. The green tops taste like a cross between scallions and garlic chives. The bulbils can be pickled, sautéed, or used anywhere you would use a shallot. In a deep pot, walking onions cannot walk anywhere, which is actually fine. They just keep producing in the same container, cycling through their seasons, giving you a self-renewing onion supply that never needs replanting. They are hardy, they tolerate neglect, and they have been grown continuously by home gardeners for hundreds of years. The reason most people have never heard of them is not that they stopped working. It is that the supermarket onion aisle made them seem unnecessary. Why grow your own when a bag of yellow onions costs $2? The answer is that the bag needs replacing every week and the pot does not. Number 11. Alpine strawberries. Not all strawberries are created equal, and Alpine strawberries are the proof. Most commercial strawberries are hybrids bred for size, shelf life, and shipping durability. They are big, firm, and often arrive at the store tasting like slightly sweet water. Alpine strawberries are the opposite. They are tiny, fragile, intensely flavored, and almost impossible to buy anywhere because they do not survive transport. The thing that makes Alpine strawberries ideal for containers is that they are true perennials that do not send out runners. Regular strawberry plants shoot out long stems that produce baby plants, which is great in a garden bed but chaotic in a pot. Alpine varieties stay compact, form tidy mounds, and produce small, pointed berries from late spring through fall. The flavor is something you have to experience to believe. It is concentrated strawberry, almost like strawberry jam made from wild fruit. Once you taste a ripe Alpine strawberry warm from the sun on your balcony, the supermarket version is never going to taste the same again. You can grow them in a pot as small as 8 inches across. They tolerate partial shade. They come back every spring. And a packet of seeds costs less than a single pint of grocery store strawberries. Alpine strawberries were the standard strawberry across Europe for centuries before the large fruited hybrid varieties took over in the 1800s. French gardens featured them prominently, and they were considered a refined dessert fruit, served with cream at elegant tables. The shift to commercial hybrids happened because the bigger berries were easier to grow at scale and survived shipping. But the trade-off was flavor, and it was not a small trade-off. Anyone who grows alpines for the first time usually has the same reaction. They taste the first ripe berry, look at it, and immediately wonder why they ever bought strawberries from a store. If you want a perennial fruit that fits on a windowsill and produces from late spring through the first frost, Alpine strawberries are probably the easiest entry point that exists. And no, they are not the same as the ornamental strawberries sold at garden centers. Look for varieties with names like Alexandria, Mignonette, or Yellow Wonder. Those are the real ones. Number 12. Asparagus. This is the one that surprises people the most, because almost nobody thinks of asparagus as a container plant. And honestly, it requires a bigger commitment than anything else on this list. You need a deep container, at least 18 inches deep and wide, to give the roots room to establish. You need patience, because asparagus takes 2 to 3 years from planting before you can harvest your first spears. But here is what you get in return. Asparagus has been cultivated since at least 3000 BC. Ancient Egyptian artwork depicts asparagus, and the Greeks and Romans considered it a delicacy. Romans even developed specific growing techniques and recorded detailed cultivation methods. The vegetable was so valued in the Roman Empire that Emperor Augustus reportedly kept special asparagus-running fleets to transport fresh spears at top speed. By the Middle Ages, asparagus had become what people called the food of kings, grown in royal greenhouses across France and England. A single asparagus crown, planted in a deep pot with rich, well-drained soil, can produce edible spears every spring for 15 to 20 years. Some well-maintained beds have produced for 30 years or more. Each crown yields about half a pound of spears per year once it reaches maturity. 2 to 3 crowns in a large container, sitting in a sunny spot on your patio, can give you fresh asparagus every April and May for longer than most people keep a car. The total investment is a big pot, some good soil, and a few crowns that cost about the same as 2 bundles of asparagus from the grocery store. Except those grocery store bundles last a week. Your pot lasts a generation. The patience required is real. You will spend 2 to 3 years watching ferny green foliage grow without cutting a single spear. That waiting period is when the crown is building the underground root system it needs to produce for the next 2 decades. Cutting too early weakens the whole plant for years. But once those roots are established, asparagus rewards you every single spring without asking for much in return. Water, a little fertilizer, and the discipline to let the ferns grow after the harvest season ends so the plant can recharge for next year. During peak season, asparagus can grow up to 2 inches per day. You will walk out to your patio one morning and find spears that were not there the day before. That kind of productivity from a plant you stuck in a pot once, years ago, is the entire argument for perennial container gardening in one image. Every plant on this list has been feeding people for centuries, some of them for thousands of years. They survived droughts, wars, famines, and the fall of entire civilizations. What they did not survive was the modern assumption that growing your own food is harder than buying it. It is not. Most of these plants need a pot, some dirt, and occasional water. The container gardening market is worth billions of dollars because people are already buying the pots. They are just filling them with plants that die in 6 months instead of plants that last for 6 years. What lasted was the plants themselves. Chives still grow the same way they did in Roman gardens. Mint still spreads. Asparagus still sends up spears every spring from the same crown for 20 years. None of them changed. None of them stopped working. The only thing that changed was us, and the assumption that convenience means buying something new every season instead of planting something once. The fix is about as simple as any fix gets. Pick one from this list, put it in a pot, and let it do what it has been doing for thousands of years. If you want to see which of these actually grows fastest in a small space, that video is on screen now.